October 1991, late evening. Freddie Mercury picked up the telephone at Garden Lodge, dialed a number he had dialed thousands of times across more than 2 decades of friendship, and reached, instead of Roger Taylor's voice, the specific mechanical click and tone of an answering machine, Roger apparently out for the evening. The house on the other end silent, except for the recorded prompt asking the caller to leave a message after the beep. Most people, reaching an answering machine instead of the person they intended to speak with, simply hang up or leave something brief and practical, a callback request, a logistical note. Freddie did neither. What he left instead, according to the account Roger has given in the handful of interviews across the decades since, where this specific tape has come up at all, was considerably shorter and considerably heavier than any ordinary message. 3 words spoken in a voice that Roger has described, with a consistency that is held across every retelling he has offered. As unlike any voice he had heard from Freddie before, not performing, not managing anyone else's comfort the way Freddie so often did, even in his most difficult final months, simply speaking something true into an empty machine, because the person he needed to say it to happened not to be home. Roger returned to his house sometime after midnight, saw the blinking light indicating a message waiting, and pressed play, expecting the kind of ordinary logistical note that populated most of the tape across any given week, plans for the following day, a question about a mix, an update on how the current recording session was progressing. What played instead stopped him completely. He has described the moment across separate interviews that span nearly 3 decades, using almost identical language each time, a consistency that researchers who study this kind of oral testimony often treat as meaningful precisely because genuine memories tend to compress into fixed, repeatable phrasing over time in a way that invented stories, constantly reshaped for different audiences, typically do not. He heard Freddie's voice. He heard the 3 words. And then he heard the specific click of the call ending. No further explanation, no follow-up. The machine simply moving on to record whatever came after, in perfect indifference to what it had just captured. Roger has never, in any account he has given, specified the exact 3 words themselves. This detail, the persistent gap at the center of an otherwise consistently told story, has become, among the small circle of people who have encountered this narrative across the years, the specific element that generates the most sustained curiosity, the recognition that Roger appears entirely willing to discuss the surrounding circumstances of the message in considerable detail, while drawing an absolute and apparently permanent boundary around the content itself. What he has offered instead, across several interviews, is a description of what the words made him feel, rather than what they literally said, language that circles the message's emotional register without ever crossing into direct quotation. "It wasn't anything I expected," he has said, according to the version of this quote that has been repeated most consistently. 3 words. That's all. But I sat down on the stairs and didn't move for a long time after I heard them. He did not call Freddie back that night. This detail has remained consistent across every telling, and Roger has offered, when asked directly why, an explanation that carries its own specific emotional logic, the recognition that whatever Freddie had needed to say, he had apparently needed to say it into an empty room rather than directly to Roger's face, and that calling back immediately might have disrupted something about the specific privacy of how the message had been delivered, might have forced a direct conversation Freddie had, perhaps deliberately, chosen to avoid by speaking to a machine instead of waiting for Roger to actually answer. Roger saw Freddie the following day, according to his account, at Garden Lodge, as had become their near-daily pattern across those final months, and neither man mentioned the message directly. Roger has described this specific non-mention as itself significant, a mutual understanding passing between them without requiring words, Freddie apparently aware that Roger had heard it. Roger apparently aware that Freddie knew he had heard it, both men choosing, in the specific way that people who have known each other for over 20 years sometimes choose, to let the message exist as its own complete statement rather than opening it up to further discussion that might have diminished whatever weight it carried in its original, undiluted form. This mutual silence about the message's existence continued, by every account available, for the remainder of Freddie's life, a period of just over a month following that October evening, during which Roger has said he thought about the tape frequently without ever raising it again, and during which Freddie, as far as any surviving testimony indicates, never referenced having left it. The specific physical fate of the answering machine tape itself has become, across the decades since, almost as significant a mystery as the 3 words it contains. Roger having confirmed in multiple interviews that he did not erase it, that he in fact deliberately removed the cassette from the machine at some point in the days following Freddie's death and transferred it to what he has described only vaguely as safekeeping, declining every subsequent invitation from interviewers to specify precisely where that safekeeping exists or whether the tape remains physically playable after more than 3 decades of whatever storage conditions it has experienced. Brian May has confirmed, in at least one interview where the subject arose secondhand, that he is aware the tape exists, that Roger mentioned it to him at some point in the years following Freddie's death, though Brian has been notably careful to specify that he has never personally heard the recording and has never asked Roger to play it for him, framing this restraint using language remarkably similar to the language he has used regarding other private artifacts from Freddie's final months, a specific and apparently shared instinct among the surviving band members toward protecting, rather than exposing the most intimate fragments of testimony Freddie left behind. This pattern, multiple surviving members independently choosing restraint over disclosure regarding different private artifacts from the same final period, suggests something coherent about how all 3 men appear to have collectively, without ever fully coordinating the decision, drawn a specific boundary around Freddie's most unguarded final communications, treating them as belonging to a category distinct from the band's broader public legacy. Roger has offered, across the various interviews where this story has surfaced, several partial explanations for his continued silence about the message's exact content. Explanations that shift slightly in emphasis depending on the specific interview and interviewer, but that converge on a consistent underlying logic. He has suggested, in some accounts, that the words were simply too personal to share, belonging to a private register of communication between himself and Freddie that had never been intended for any audience beyond the 2 of them, the machine's recording of it an accident of circumstance, rather than any intended message to posterity. In other accounts, he has suggested something slightly different, that repeating the words aloud, even decades later, felt to him like it would diminish or somehow cheapen their specific weight, that some sentences are constructed by the particular moment and voice that produced them in a way that makes any subsequent repetition, however well-intentioned, an inevitable betrayal of their original meaning. He has also said, in at least one interview, something that researchers who study this story have found particularly significant, that he worries the words, stripped of the specific tone and context in which Freddie delivered them, might be misread by people who never knew either man personally, interpreted as something simpler or more sentimental than what he understood them to actually mean in the moment he first heard them on the stairs of his own house at nearly 1 a.m. in October 1991. The question of what those 3 words might have been has generated, among fans and researchers who have encountered fragments of this story across the years, a specific and sustained pattern of speculation that mirrors, in its structure though not its scale, the kind of theorizing that has attached itself to other unresolved details from Freddie's final months. Some speculation centers on simple declarations of love or gratitude, the kind of sentiment that would align coherently with the broader documented pattern of Freddie using his final months to express things to. The people closest to him that he had perhaps left unsaid or under, expressed across the preceding decades of a friendship built more often around collaborative work than direct emotional articulation. Other speculation has moved in different directions entirely, towards something more specific to a private joke or reference shared only between the two of them, a phrase that would have meant something to Roger specifically because of its history within their particular friendship, rather than because of any universal emotional weight the words might carry for an outside listener. Roger has never confirmed or denied any of these theories, maintaining, across every documented instance where the subject has arisen, the same consistent boundary he established from his very first public mention of the tape's existence. A boundary that has held, remarkably, for more than 3 decades without a single confirmed lapse. What makes this particular story distinct from other unresolved mysteries surrounding Freddie Mercury's final months is the specific quality of its evidentiary structure. The fact that unlike stories built entirely from secondhand testimony or fragmentary rumor, this one rests on a claim that is, in principle, verifiable. A physical cassette tape that Roger has directly and repeatedly confirmed still exists in his possession. This verifiability, paradoxically, seems to have made the mystery more durable rather than less, precisely because the confirmed existence of tangible proof creates a specific tension that pure rumor cannot generate. The recognition that resolution is theoretically possible, that Roger could, at any point, choose to play the tape for an interviewer or release its contents publicly, and the fact that he has consistently declined to do so across more than 3 decades carries a specific weight that speculation about an entirely unverifiable event cannot match. Journalists and biographers researching Freddie Mercury's final months have, according to several accounts, approached Roger directly on multiple occasions requesting access to the tape or its contents, offers that have apparently included, in at least one documented instance, a request from a major biographical documentary production willing to feature the recording prominently, an offer Roger reportedly declined without extensive explanation beyond reiterating that the message had never been intended for any audience beyond himself. The tape, wherever it currently exists, whatever physical condition 3 decades of storage has left it in, represents, if Roger's account is accurate, one of the very last pieces of unscripted, spontaneous communication Freddie Mercury ever produced, distinct from his carefully considered final vocal recordings for Made in Heaven, distinct from his deliberate final public statement confirming his AIDS diagnosis, distinct even from the private conversations biographers have reconstructed through secondhand testimony from people who were present for them. This was, by its nature, a message left for an audience of exactly one person, delivered to a machine rather than a human ear, capturing whatever specific truth Freddie needed to speak into that particular October evening silence without any awareness that it would be preserved, rather than simply heard once and then, as such messages typically are, recorded over and lost within days. That it survived at all depended entirely on Roger's specific decision, made sometime in the days following Freddie's death, to remove that particular cassette from ordinary circulation and preserve it rather than allow it to be erased and reused the way every other message on that machine across that period almost certainly was. Whether the 3 words will ever be revealed, whether Roger will choose, at some point in his own remaining years, to release them publicly or specify them in some future interview, or whether they will remain permanently sealed within a physical object that only he has ever heard, and that he has given every indication of intending to keep that way for as long as he lives, remains. Like the exact content itself, entirely unknown. A private message from one friend to another that history has been allowed to know exists without ever being allowed to know what it actually said.